1 year ago, I posted a video roasting this song. While the memory of the video is distant, my thoughts of the song and the album it originated from remains the same. Now, while Baja has made consistently good albums in what I dub the mainline discography, also known as his solo career, Idemo, dalje stands out for having songs that are blatant filler. It's not to say that most of Baja's discography doesn't have any filler songs in them. For example, the songs Joža Tužni, Srbi se nikog ne boje, Gavrilo, and Dođi Pope, Ljubimo ti stope are filler songs, at least in my opinion. These songs, however, are able to mask it better thanks to the musical direction taken and, most importantly, time. Remember that. Unfortunately, I can't say the same for this album. While there are some good songs in this album, don't get me wrong, like Ojalia Nisi Više Glavni and Ponosan Što sam Srbin, obvious disclaimer, I do not condone the messages expressed in these songs. Other songs don't sound as good. Take one of the most egregious examples in the album, Teče Дрина.
Teče una, teče sana I korana plava Samo sloga, Srbina spašava.
This is arguably one of the worst Baja songs. It's not the worst though, that would have to go to Stara kuća on Jesse Legendo. While I've made it clear that I'm not fond of Željko Jovanović's style, I don't think he's entirely to blame. He's just an arranger, you know, the guy who realizes an idea. After all, he did make this banger. In my honest opinion, I think that the real suspect is none other than Baja. Yes, the Ninja himself is to blame. But why? Well, what if I told you that this album might have been a little too reactionary? What if I told you that this album was rushed? Let's break this down piece by piece. One of the most obvious indicators is in the title track, Idemo, dalje. The song provides a vague but general timeline, at least at the time of conception. The opening line translates to Srebrenica has fallen and Žepo will too, which gives us a time frame of July 11th to 26th in 1995. So that means that the album was released at the end of July, right? Now remember, I said that it was one of the obvious indicators. There's actually another song that provides its own time frame of conception. The closing track of side A, Vratиćemo, has the opposite tone of Idemo, dalje. While the song has a bit of a filler aspect to it, the song itself is about the land exchanges or territorial changes that occurred at the time of its conception. I mean, the opening verse literally makes note of it. The chorus makes note of Grahovo falling, but not Knin, which gives the time frame of July 28th to August 5th. Both songs, if you haven't caught on yet, seem to have been written in real time. But what about the other songs? To fill in the album's contents, a cover of Ponosan Sam Što sam Srbin, I am so glad this album shortens it, which initially appeared on the 1994 album Idu braća Krajčnici, appears on this album. There are also the aforementioned songs Teče Дрина and Има Бога, Има правде, which use common tropes found in other patriotic albums, though the former would be more simplistic and generic than the latter. So that's pretty much it in terms of analyzing the album's contents as a whole. Though, to make my argument stronger, let's look at it from a different perspective. Let's take a look at the J card, shall we? While double folds in the Keninja's Superton discography were commonplace starting in late 1993, this album doesn't have it. There's also no photographer credited, instead a photo selector is. While I don't know if a photo shoot with this image was posted elsewhere before the album's release, pictures of Baja with this exact outfit has been seen in other albums, namely Bila Jednam, Jedna Zemlja, and of course Igraju se dalje. Speaking of Igraju se dalje, does this image look familiar to you? This album also has something that is crucial to this theory that Idemo dalje was rushed. Something not seen in other Superton releases. A typo in Svetin Todorović's name. I know, you're laughing. It's weird and insignificant. But I promise you this is a vital piece of evidence. Let me explain. At the time of writing the script, this is the only known occasion where Todorović's name would have a typo like this. It's also written in Latin, which is weird for an album using the Cyrillic script. While I could propose that original versions forgot this credit, a first edition copy debunks this theory. Now, a hastily put together job is probably why this never credited a photographer nor a graphic designer in the first place. Speaking of which, notice how simplistic the graphic design is on the J card? Compared to other works Superton released at the time, it's pretty simplistic in contrast to the designs of the albums released in the same year that just pop out, or at least have some sort of crazy graphic design that draws you in. Now, with all of our ingredients for this theory, it's time to sandwich them together. With all the pieces of evidence laid out, here's a likely series of events. Upon hearing the news of the fate of Srebrenica, Baja was inspired to create a song to celebrate, which would become the title track. It's also possible that with victory on the horizon, the songs Oj Alija nisi više glavni and Teče Дрина would be written in this time frame as well. On July 28th, however, the unexpected happened. Grahovo fell. Not only would Vratиćemo be written in response, but the album's once cheery and victorious tone would change. Likely following the news on the fate of Krajina closely and with a sense of urgency, Baja would scramble to get the album done on time. On a side note, with connections in the industry, he most likely asked Neđo Mitrović to cover Ponosan Sam što sam Srbin, or maybe Neđo merely suggested it. With no time to spare, Baja would have to rely on older photo shoots rather than new ones. With the production needing to be wrapped up in a short time span, the graphic designers hired whipped up a design, though left some errors in the process. With the design being more reliant on black and white, it would also be easier and quicker to print copies en masse, though this is probably a coincidence. The album was released, and that's the end of the timeline. While it did meet the deadline, it did not meet sales. But that's for another day. It's also important to note that during development of an album in general, songs are made in random order and then they get compiled. So while my theoretical timeline is supported by going sequentially through tracks, it could also be that maybe most tracks were made before or after Grahovo fell, or maybe they were even backlogged B-sides kind of content that had to be shoved into this album. We may never know. So what do you think about my theory? That's totally original, and I didn't totally steal it from a colleague of mine. Now, this doesn't change my perspective on the album. I do think that out of every war album made, this is probably Baja's weakest. But it makes me understand it more. On a serious note, unless if Baja decides to make an interview talking about each and every album's development process in meticulous detail, we may never know what really happened behind the scenes. And of course, it's hard to contact him anyways. He's still quite popular, especially in social media. I can only imagine the hundreds of hate DMs he gets every day. With that said, there is one last burning question. What the hell does Baja say at the end of Idemo, dalje?
Idemo! Za lomi desno im krivo, pa ne daj da mi se ti rekao da ne idemo. Udru tužina!